All right, we might go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to today's webinar. It's part of our Zenphi Automation Stories series. And today I'll be talking about how we use Zenphi internally to automate our quote generation and approval process as part of our sales team. My name is Steve Heaney. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Zenphi. And for a large part of my professional career, I've been working on no-code, low-code automation platforms, predominantly in the Microsoft ecosystem. But I'm really excited for the last couple of years to be part of the Zenphi team and bringing these technologies and these capabilities to Google Workspace. On today's call, I've also got our CEO, Vahid Taslimi. He's the co-host and he will be helping to moderate this webinar. Just a couple of things before we get started. This session is being recorded. If you do have questions, we will have time at the end for questions, but also please feel free to post your questions in the webinar and Vahid will be sure to respond to those as we go along. So just a quick overview for those of you who are not familiar with Zenphi. Zenphi is a no-code automation platform that's been designed specifically for Google Workspace. It has really deep integration with all of the Google Workspace apps, Docs, Forms, Slides, Sheets, the Google directory, as well as rich integration to other line of business systems that you may need to access. For example, CRM systems like HubSpot and Salesforce, and digital signing platforms like DocuSign and Adobe Sign. Zenphi is being built specifically for Google and it runs in the Google Cloud. We're currently hosting data centers in Australia, the US, and also in Europe. And we have other data center locations coming online towards the end of this year. With Zenphi, you can automate all kinds of internal business processes, whether it be leave requests, expense approvals, quote generation, which we'll be doing today, HR processes, pretty much any process that you can imagine as a flow chart or something you can draw up on a whiteboard, you'll be able to easily automate that using Zenphi. It's just a matter of finding the right actions in the toolbox, dragging them onto the design canvas, wiring them up together, and then your flow has been created. Like all organizations, at Zenphi, we have a lot of internal business processes that we use to run the business. And wherever we can, we look to automate those processes using our own Zenphi platform. And today I'm going to be showing you how we automated our quote generation process as part of our sales team using Zenphi. Now, before we automated this process, basically what used to happen whenever our sales reps needed to issue a new quote, they would go to Docs, they'd find the last quote that they sent to another customer, they'd open it up, they'd save a copy of it, and they'd go into it and start making changes, updating the customer name, pricing details, the dates, a very manual process. Once they'd done that, they'd export it as a PDF and then they'd send it on email to the customer. The customer would then need to open it up, print it out, sign it by hand, scan it back in and send it back to us. Quite a manual process. Now, there were a couple of problems with it being a manual process. One was that it was very time consuming for our sales teams. They needed to be in front of a PC to be able to open up and edit the quote and save it as a PDF and whatnot. And the other problem was that we had inconsistencies between the sales reps. Each sales rep had their own version of the quote template that might have had slightly different quote terms, slightly different pricing. And being a manual process, it was also quite prone to errors, human input errors. So as they're going through and replacing details in the quote, they may leave some out, accidentally have the wrong dates or the wrong pricing, and that could be quite embarrassing for us when those quotes got sent out to the customer. Hence the need to automate this process. So in terms of automating this process with Zenphi, there are kind of 3 steps. First thing we needed to do was to create a master template file in a format that Zenphi was able to read. So this is just a Google Docs and we're going through and we're anonymizing the quote template and putting in some tokens or some placeholders for where Zenphi is going to run and replace that information with the real information when the flow runs. We used a Google Forms form to collect the information required to generate the quote, and this was what was used to also start our process. And then finally, we got into Zenphi and we wired it all up and created our flow. So today I'm going to take you through how we did this basically from the beginning. So it's going to be quite an in-depth presentation, but I'll take you through all the steps. I'm not going to leave anything out, and you'll see exactly how easy it is to automate these processes using Zenphi. Okay, so let's get started. I'm here in my Google Drive and I have an existing quote. Let me open it up. This was a quote that we sent to one of our customers here in Australia. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this quote into a template file that can be used in our Zenphi flow. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save a copy of this. And I'll call this the Zenphi quote template. Now, what I need to do is I need to go through here and replace all of the pieces of information that are specific to a customer with tokens that Zenphi is going to be able to pick up in the flow. So here I have quote number, and all I do is I just put a double curly brace and type in the name of the token. It can be any name as long as I put it within these curly braces, so Zenphi knows that that's a token that needs to be replaced. Call this one quote date. Expiry date. Currency. And we have our customer who it's going to. And the contact. Their email address. Their billing address. Here we have this table with the line items that are in this quote. What I'm actually going to do here is replace this entire table with a token, and I'll call it product details. And I'll show you later in our flow how we replace this token by merging in a Google Sheet table into the document to create that products table. Down here, we can pre-fill their name, and I can reuse the token that I used earlier, the contact name. Doesn't matter how many times the tokens appear in the document, Zenphi is going to replace all of those locations. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. I now have a template file. It doesn't have any other customer information. This is going to be my master template, and I'm going to use for creating all quotes from here on in. The next part of the process is to create the start form. So I'm just going over to forms now, and I'll create a new form. And I'll give this a title. I'll call it quote generation. And now I've got a series of questions that I need to ask to start off this particular flow. So basically, I need to capture all the information that I need to fill out that template. So I'll start off with the company name. I will need to know the contact person. This is just a standard Google form that I'm creating here. Billing address, and I'll make this one a multi-line. Their email. Currency. The currency at Zenphi, we sell in a few different currencies. So I'll put in AUD, Australian dollars. I'll put US, euros, and British pounds. I'll need to know what product it is that they're purchasing, whether it's our essentials here or it's our, and I'll make this a choice, essentials or product, whether it's our essentials tier or our professional tier. And finally, I'll need to capture the subscription start date. That one's going to be a date. Okay, so now I have all the information I need for my form. I can give this a quick preview and see what it looks like. Yeah, it looks good, capturing all the essential information there. Now that I have my form, the next step is to go ahead and actually jump into Zenphi and start creating this flow. So here I am here. When you sign up to Zenphi and you log in, you'll be presented with the Zenphi dashboard. There's some information here about other flows that have run and how many you've got created and whatnot. But I'm just going to go ahead now. I'm going to create a new flow. Now, whenever you create a new Zenphi flow, the first thing you're asked is, how is this flow going to start? So you can have a flow that starts manually. You just go into Zenphi and say, run this process. You can have a scheduled flow that would run on a timer or a calendar schedule. So perhaps you run something at the end of each month. You could do that with a scheduled flow. We have HTTP trigger, which is more of an integration thing for kicking it off from other systems. We can start a flow when a new file arrives inside of a Google Drive folder that we're watching. We can even start a Zenphi flow whenever a new email arrives into your inbox. Or in this case, which we're going to use, we can start a new flow when a Google form response has been collected. So when that form gets filled out. So I'll go ahead and I will generate this flow starting based on this form. So here I am in the design canvas. This is the empty canvas here. First thing I'm going to do is go ahead and give this flow a name. So I'll call this quote generation. And you'll see here that the first thing that happens is this trigger. This is our Google form. Now I need to configure this. I need to tell Zenphi which form we're interested in collecting the submissions from. When I go to configure a Zenphi action, typically you'll need to configure a connection. Now the connection is how Zenphi authenticates and communicates with the assets that are inside Google Workspace. So right here, I'm creating a new Google Forms connection. You can choose whether it's a shared connection, which means other workflow designers in your tenancy will be able to use this connection as well, or you can make it private so that only you can use it. I'm going to make this one private. I go ahead and authorize this, and it's going to pop up and tell me that, hey, Zenphi wants to access these permissions to be able to collect the responses from the form. So I'll go ahead and allow this. My connection has been created. The next thing I need to do is go and select that form that I created. Now, one thing I realized I didn't do is I didn't save this to my webinar folder. So I'll just go ahead and do that now. So I'll make sure all of my files are together. And inside of Zenphi, I'll go ahead and select that form. So here it is here, quote generation. I select it. Now what Zenphi is doing is it's going off and it's querying that form for all of the different questions that we're asking and all the information that we're collecting in the form. So we can see here, all of the questions that we asked are now coming into Zenphi, and this is information we can use as part of the flow. Right, so this particular flow, I need to generate a new document based on a template. So in my toolbox here, you can see I've got all these different categories of actions, but the one that I'm interested here is inside of Google Docs. I want to create a document using a template. So I just click and drag that onto the canvas, click on the settings icon to configure it. And here it is asking me again, what connection do you want to use? Now there's another shared connection on here that I could use, but I'm going to go ahead and create a new connection specific to this particular flow. Now, the reason why Zenphi's asked me to create a new connection, it's not reusing the one I just created earlier, is because each action requires a slightly different set of permissions to perform its work. And Zenphi only ever requests the minimum amount of access that it needs for each particular action. It also allows you to scope the connections and keep them sort of best practice in terms of which connections are being used for which actions. I'm going to go ahead now and select the template file that we created earlier. So here we have our Zenphi quote template. I'll select that guy. And you can see automatically Zenphi has gone in and pulled out all of those tokens that we added into that template, and it's put them here as information that we need to populate in order to create our document. Now, destination folder. Where would I like this new generated document to live? What I can do is I'll go back into Drive, and I'm actually going to create a new folder here called generated quotes. And back in Zenphi, I will select that folder. That's where I want to store the files. In terms of the file name, I'll call it Zenphi quote, and I'm going to insert a reference. So wherever you see this icon in Zenphi, you can get access to information that the flow has. In the trigger, that's all information we collected from the form. I want to use the company name because I want to create my file names with that. And I can just insert it there, and that's going to put the company name as part of that file name. I have options here to generate HTML or generate a PDF, but right now I'm just interested in creating the doc. So let's get to these pieces of information that I need to fill in. There are some here that can come straight from the form. So customer name, I can just go ahead and pull off the company name, the contact name, get that from the form as well, the email address, billing address. So I'm just selecting all of these from that form trigger. So all information that's coming in from the form. Quote date and the expiry date. Now I don't have those in the form. I'm going to have to calculate those using Zenphi. Currency I do have, we collected that in the form. I'll put that in. And the product details is going to be a table. I have to get that from a sheet. So I'm not going to be able to do that right now. So let's go ahead and work on these other three that we've got here. So quote number. So what I would like to do is each time a new quote is generated, I would like to increment the quote number that the system's using so that I don't have two quotes going out with the same quote number. So one way I can do this is using sheets. So back in Google Drive, you notice I've got this sheet here called price list. Now this is the price list for all the different Google products, and we're going to use this as part of our flow in a moment. But what I'm actually going to do here is I'm just going to create another sheet called, let's give this the name, quote log. Now, each time this flow runs, I'm going to add in here a new row to this particular sheet using Zenphi. So back in Zenphi, and I'll show you why I'm doing that in just a moment. So let's see, we're going to Google Sheets this time, and I want to use an add row, so I'll drag that on. Once ahead, go and configure it. I've got a connection there I can use. I'm going to select the file that I want to insert into. There's the price list sheet. The sheet name, the quote log, that's one I just created. Now I can say it has a header, and I can ask Zenphi to go ahead and load those columns so I can see exactly what I need to fill in here. So I've got a customer and a product. So for customer, I'll just go ahead and put in the company name, and the product, I'll go ahead and put in the product we had there as well. Now what you'll notice is this particular action, add row, one of its outputs is the row number of the newly added row. And I'm going to use that as my quote number. However, I don't want my quote numbers to start from 1, 2, 3. I'd like them to start from, say, 10,001, 10,002, just to make it a little bit more professional. So fortunately, Zenphi has these operators that I can use. And one of those allows me to perform a maths operation. So I'll just drag that in after the add row. And what I'm going to do here is compute the quote number. The first number I'm going to use is the row number that came out of that Google Sheets add row action. And I want to add. The second number is 10,000. And what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to double click on this action. I'm going to rename it so it makes it a little bit more meaningful for me in the designer. I'll call this quote number. Now, in my generate document where it asks for quote number, I can use that quote number that I just computed and stick that in there. So the other piece of information I need is the quote date and the expiry date. Zenphi has an action called current date time. So I'll just drag that on there into the canvas. And I'll choose, what this is going to do is basically just go and query what is the current date and time. So I will choose a time zone. So I'm over here in Australia. If I can find it, there it is. And what I'm also able to do here is add a format string. So if I want to use this date as a string, like I do in my template, I can format the date right here in this action. So let's give this a nice international format. And I'm going to call this the quote date. Now, to calculate the expiry date at Zenphi, our quotes are always valid for 14 days. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 14 days to that quote date to create my quote expiry date. So I drag on an add date time action. And the date that I'm starting with is going to be the quote date. And I want to add 14 days to that. I also would like to format this one, so I'll put it in the same format. And I'll give this a name. I'll call this quote expiry. Now in our generate document action, I can go ahead and fill in those last two there, quote date. And I'm going to use the formatted result. And same for the expiry date. Use the formatted result of that one. Okay, now there's product details. I'm actually just going to remove that one for now because I'm going to need to use another action to put that in. So back in this price list sheet, I also have this other sheet here called quote table. This is the table that I'm going to use to insert into my quote document whenever the quote gets requested and the flow runs. However, I need to update the details in this row here. So I need to find out what the price is, and I'm going to do that by querying this price list. So let's go ahead and do that first in Zenphi. So what I need to do is back into Google Sheets. I need to perform a lookup row. I'll create a connection. I'll choose the file or the sheet that I'm interested in looking up information from. So in this case, it's going to be our price list. The sheet name will be the price list sheet. And I'll say this has got a header and I'll load those columns. And the column I want to search in is base product. And the value that I'm searching for is going to be an annual, then the product that we're being requested in the form. And finally, I'll put subscription there. The reason why I've put annual and then the product and subscription is because that is how it is represented here in our price list. So it's going to search through this column and pull back the entire row. Here I can say whether I want to bring back the values as formatted or not. I'll leave that as formatted. And I can choose which columns I want to retrieve from this lookup row. I'm going to pull back all of the information in the matching row. Okay, so now I've got the product and I've got the price in the 4 different currencies. But I now need to choose the currency that has been selected in the form to kick off this flow. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use another operator called switch by value. What this allows me to do is direct the logic of this flow down one of these branches based on a particular value. So the input value I'm using here is the currency that's been selected in the form. And the possible values are AUD, Euro, Pounds, and I'll make the default branch USD. Okay, so depending on which currency has been selected in the form, the control flow of the logic is going to go down the relevant branch. What I'm actually going to do here is because I need to pull out the price, the relevant price for the currency, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a workflow variable. Now, a workflow variable is a way of storing a piece of information that can be used globally across the entire flow in all of the different actions. So I'll call this product price. Make that a string. We'll save that guy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a variable. That's the way you assign a variable a value. And I'm going to set this product price, and the value is when I'm coming down the AUD branch from that lookup we did, I need to select the AUD price. Now I need to do the same for each of the other currencies. What I can do here is I can right click and copy and save myself a few steps. Just go in here and select the appropriate price. So this one is for euros. Now we'll do for pounds. And finally, for USD. Okay, so now I have the product price that I need to do. I've got the price. I've got all the information I need to be able to go and update that quote table that's in this particular sheet. One thing I'll notice here is that the end date is actually a computed field, so I don't need to update that. When I put the start date in, this particular sheet's got a formula that's automatically going to go ahead and calculate the end date for me. So to update that one, once again, I go back to Google Sheets. And this time I'm going to be doing an update row. Got my connection there, choose the file that I want to update. Sheet. This time it's going to be that quote table. The row number will be the second row. I can say it's got a header and load those columns. I can start putting values in here. So for the product, I'll put, spell correctly, annual, product that's been selected, subscription. Renewed annually. Start date will be from the form, the subscription start date. The end date's going to get computed automatically, so I don't need to fill that out. And the price, here's where I'm going to use our workflow variable that we said earlier to put the product price in there. Okay, so now I've updated that table. Now I need to merge it back into the doc that we have created earlier using that template. What we have here under Google Docs is we have this very cool action called Insert Sheets Table into Document. That's exactly what I need to use here. So I'll go ahead and create a connection for it. And it's asking me what is the sheet where you want to pull the information from. So I go in here and I select my price list sheet. I can choose how I want to define the selection, how I want to select the contents from the spreadsheet. In this case, I'm going to get all data from the quote table sheet. And the docs file where I'm going to be merging this into is going to be the file ID that was generated before using the generate document using template. Now the token that I want to use here, this was from my quote template, is product details. So I'll put that in here. Add that in. The column width, I'll say auto adjust it so it fits nicely in my document. And I am done. So let's give this a run and see how we go. So I'll publish this now. Here's our preview this document. Let's have a look. So company name, I'm going to put Acme Inc. That'll do. Contact person, billing address, email address. I'll just put my own for the purposes of this. Currency, let's say USD. we'll make it the professional product, and the subscription start date can be the 1st of next month. So we'll go ahead and submit that form, and we'll see what's happening back in Zenphi. So back here on recent runs, I can see now that I have a new instance of this quote generation flow that we've just created has now kicked off as a result of me submitting that form. Now I refresh here, I can see all of the steps that this particular flow is executing right now. It's up to the generating of the document. Gone through now, we're updating that pricing table. And we have finished. We've inserted the sheets table into the document and it's completed. So let's go back to Google Drive and have a look inside of generated quotes now. And you'll notice I have a new quote doc that's been generated. Let's open it up and have a look at it. And there it is. All of the information that I collected in the forms being put in there. We've got the quote expiry dates, the prepared dates, currency, the correct pricing is being pulled out from that sheet. And this document is ready now to be converted to a PDF and sent to our customer. So jumping back into our flow now. What we can do, we could convert this to a PDF and send it off to the customer. But what our sales team like to do is they like to have an opportunity to review the quote to see what Zenphi's created before we go ahead and send that to the customer. And the way we go about doing that is we can assign a task. So we can use this for approvals, but in this case, we're using it for a review. And I'm going to call this sales review. And let's have a look and see what's going on inside here. So for the task name, I'll call this quote review. And the possible outcomes that I'm going to have here are send to the customer and cancel quote. So that after the salesperson reviews it, they can choose to now, yep, it's good to go, we'll send it off to the customer. Or they could say, I want to cancel this quote, in which case we terminate the flow and delete the quote that was created. Now, who are we assigning this task to? So in our Google form, we should have the initiator's email. I'm just going to check to make sure that we selected that in our Google form. So back in the Google form here on the settings, we have this option here to collect emails. And that's going to collect the email address of the person who's submitting the form, in our case, our sales rep. So I'll make sure I've got that in there. The subject of the email will be, please review the quote for, and I'll put the company name in there. The body will be, please review the below quote and respond. What I can do here is I can actually put a link to that docs file that we generated earlier. So I'll go down here and I'll grab the view link. I'll stick that in there so it appears right in their email for them. Okay, so the possible outcome, send to customer and cancel quote. So I'll just copy this, send to customer. So after it goes through the sales review and after they've responded to the task, we need to determine whether they've said to send it on or whether to cancel the quote. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to drag on an if condition. And I'm going to put in my logic here. When the sales review outcome is equal to send to the customer, we're going to go down the true branch. Otherwise, we're going to go down the false branch. So what I can do here is rename this to make it more obvious. Send to customer. Now, if we go down the false branch, we're basically going to end this flow. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to delete the item that we created, the quote, just to clean up. And once again, I can just put in here the file ID, the document we generated, and finally terminate the flow. So if they choose not to proceed, it's going to go down this branch and the flow will end. However, if they choose to proceed, what we want to do now is turn this into a PDF. So what we can do inside of Google Docs, we have an action here called export document, which allows us to change it from a Google Doc into a PDF file. So the source file in this scenario is going to be the file ID of the document that we generated. And Zenphi is smart enough to give me a suggestion here and say, this is what we think you probably want. And where do we want to stick these? So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and put that back into the generated quotes folder that we created earlier. The output file name, we'll give it Zenphi quote, we'll put the customer name in there. And this is going to be a PDF file. These are all different formats I can export it as, but I'm interested in PDF. So that's great. Now we need to send it to the customer. So what I could do here is I could go to Gmail and drag on a send email action and send it off to the customer like they're doing in the manual process. But then the customer would have to print this out, sign it by hand, and then send it back to us. What would be much cooler is if we kicked off a e-signature signing request, and so they could return the quote digitally signed rather than having to print it out. So I'll just go ahead and remove this send email for a moment. And if I scroll down here, I'll see that I've got a number of different signing options. I've got Adobe Sign, I've got Anicha Sign, I've got DocuSign. And they all behave very similarly. Basically, you can just drag them on and send off a request for e-signing. In this scenario, I'm going to use Anicha Sign. So I'll drag that over here. And here I need to configure a connection to Anicha. I already have one, but I'll just show you what it looks like. So when you configure a connection to some of these third-party systems, like the digital signature platforms, they will ask for your API key and an API ID. This is information that you would get after logging in your account section, integrations or something like that. You'd pull those values out and you'd create a connection inside of Zenphi using those values here. So I've already done that for Anicha, and I'm going to use this connection that I created earlier. The document payload, so this is the PDF file that I want to use. So from the export document, and grab the exported document. That's the PDF that we need to get signed. I can give this a name, so I'll call this Zenphi quote and put the customer name in there. The message will be, please review and sign if you accept. What's the name of the person who's going to be doing the signing? So we have put the contact person in there. It's asking for their email address. So we'll go ahead and put that in there as well. And they need to sign it. And here it's asking me, do you have a placeholder for where in the document, where in that PDF, they actually need to put the signature box? So what we can actually do here is if I go back to our quote template, this is the one that's been created. Here's our template here. We actually do have a spot here where we want them to sign. So a way for me to tell the signing platform that we need to sign here, bear with me a second, is I can put in here another token, I'll call it signature. Now, if I leave it like that, it's going to show up in the PDF that we generate as these curly braces with signature on it. So one trick we can do here is if we highlight that token and we make the color of it white, it's still there in the PDF, but if you actually open the PDF in a PC or print it out, you're not going to be able to see it, and there'll just be the field there to fill in. But now the digital signing platform, we can tell it that's the place where we want to put the signature. So I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so now we've sent off an e-signing request using Anicha. The customer is going to receive that, and if they sign it, we want to go ahead and grab that signed PDF and store it back into Google Drive in a signed documents folder. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to my Google Drive, and the first thing I will do is I'll create a new folder called signed documents. Signed quotes. Now, the outcome of the e-signature request could be that they signed it or they didn't. So I need to do another if statement to check to make sure that they have in fact signed it. I'll call this if signed. this condition. So when the e-signature outcome is equal to signed, we're going to go down the true branch, otherwise we go down the false branch. So if it is signed by the customer, what we want to do is we want to save a file into Google Drive. So drag on the save file, got my connection there, that's okay. Now, what's the file that I actually want to save in there? And you'll notice here on that e-sign document, we have the payload, which is basically the contents of the signed PDF. That's what I'm interested in. And where do I want to store that? Into that folder that we just created. Signed quotes. Okay, so now we should be good to go. Let's give this a try end to end. So I'll publish it. And I will submit another form response here. Link, contact person, billing address, Australia. For the email address, I'm going to put my own so you can see the experience that the customer would have with that e-signature request. Currency, I'll make Australian dollars. Professional. Start date, let's go start of October and submit that form. Okay, let's see what's happening this time. So go to my recent runs. I've got a new execution running. It's using the new version of the flow, version 2.0. Let's see where it gets to. So we're building up the document still, creating a template file. And you'll see here, it's paused now on the sales review. So I was the person who requested this quote. So let's have a look in my inbox and see. We've got no new mail. Let's do a quick refresh. There it is. Please review the quote that's been generated. So this, I'm acting as a sales rep now. I come in here and it's telling me, please review the quote and respond. We want to either send to the customer or cancel. I've got a link here. I can open up the quote file that's been generated. I could make some changes at this point if I wanted to as well. But that all looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. It's got the dates. It's got the correct details there. I will go back to my email and respond to this task and I'll say, send it to the customer. So the sales rep's now finished. We have a look at what's happening inside of Zenphi. And it's continued on. So we've gone sent to the customer. Yes, it's exported the document as a PDF. And it's now paused on this e-sign. So it's sent off a digital signature request to the customer. Now, because I use my own email address as the customer, I should be able to go back to the inbox here and have a look and see what we've got. Okay, so as the customer, I'm receiving this, please review and accept the quote. We can review the document here. And it's telling me that I need to review and sign this particular quote. You notice here it's picked up where the signature needs to go. That's because of the token that we put in earlier. I can click to sign this. I could draw a signature, or I could use one of these ones. Finish signing. And we're done. So the customer has now signed this quote. We jump back into Zenphi and see what's going on here. Zenphi will continue on once it receives that back from the digital signing platform. You see, it went through that if signed, and it was, and it went ahead and saved the file. So if we jump back into Google Drive now, we go into signed quotes, we should have the signed PDF with the customer's signature. And there it is. So you can see now we're fully automated all the way through to the customer acceptance, which is really, really cool. However, the final thing that we did for our sales team was after the customer has accepted the quote and they've signed it, the other thing they need to do is they need to go into CRM, we use HubSpot, and they need to update the deal status to closed won. And we can do that automatically for them using Zenphi. So if I jump down to this branch, the customer's signed that we've saved the file. I'm now going to scroll down to some of these HubSpot actions. So the first thing I need to do, see HubSpot here, I need to go and find the deal records for this particular customer. And the way I would do that is I would go and read the deals that match the criteria we're looking for. Once again, you need a HubSpot connection here. I've already got one that I configured earlier. I then choose the type of HubSpot object that I want. So I'm looking at deals. The condition here is going to be the email address is equal to the email address of my customer. And just to be certain, I'll say the deal stage, is deal closed is equal to no. So it's an open deal for this customer. And I'm interested in getting back the deal ID. So I can use this to update the specific deal record to closed. Now, because this is bringing back potentially a collection of deals, what I need to do now is I need to use a query collection to go and grab the first item of those return deals. So under operations, I have a query collection. And the collection I'm querying is the output of those records from HubSpot. And I'm interested in the first item. And I'm going to call this deal ID. Next, I need to go and update that particular deal. So I go back into the HubSpot actions. This time I want to update a record. The type is a deal. The object ID is going to be my deal ID that I got back when I did a query for it. And I want to change the deal stage to closed one. And I also want to put in the closed one reason. I'm just going to put a link to that signed PDF document. So where we save the file, grab the view link, stick that in there, and we are done. That is now also going to go into HubSpot, update the deal for this customer and say it's now been won. It's going to move that to the stage, and it's going to put a link into HubSpot as to where I can go and find the signed quote. Publish that flow, and we have automated the process now end to end. I won't run it because I don't have deals set up for myself inside of our own HubSpot, but you can see here how that would work. We also have integration with Salesforce as well. If your customers are using Salesforce, you could do a similar thing with our Salesforce actions. Okay, so just jumping back into the slides, just a very quick recap of everything we did there. There's quite a lot to get through, but as you can see, using Zenphi, automating this stuff, once you get the hang of it, is pretty straightforward. We went ahead and we created just a Google Docs file, but we tagged it up as a template so that Zenphi could pick up on those different placeholders and we could use that as part of our flow. We used a Google form, just a vanilla Google form, and we use that to collect information that we need to feed into our process to start it off. We used the document generation actions as part of Zenphi to create that new document based on the template. We used Google Sheets to do some calculations for us and to do some formatting. We updated the information in Google Sheets. We read it back out. We merged it into our quote document. You can see how we used an approval task so that we could pause the flow and allow our sales rep to go and review the document that had been created. We then converted it to a PDF, use Anich's digital signing platform to request the e-signature from the customer, and finally go into HubSpot and update CRM. So once again, I hope you can appreciate, we've actually automated quite a lot there just in the last 40 minutes or so. And now that saves our sales team a lot of time and reduces a lot of those manual errors that they were having. So with that, Vahid, I will open up to questions. Did we have any posted on the chat?
Sure, Steve. A few have come through. And thanks everyone for waiting for the questions to be answered. So the first question is, if we needed to get more approvals, for example, from a sales manager, can we do that?
Good question. So one of the great things about Zenphi is as you're your requirements change. As you saw there, I kept adding bits and pieces to the flow. If we wanted to go back into this flow and say after the sales rep's done a review, we then wanted to do another review process, we can very easily just drag on another assigned task. This time we might want to assign it to the sales manager, and we could get them to go ahead and do that.
Nice. So the next one is, can I manage permissions on Google Docs?
Yes, you can. So if we go into, I believe it's, let me do a search for the action. It's a share item, I think it is. Yeah, so with this share item action, this is pretty powerful. What we can do here is we can specify a file or folder by its ID in Google Drive. So in our case, we could reference that document that we created. We can then select a role, and we can put in the email address of the user who we want to make that role. So after the sales rep's finished their editing of the document, we might want to demote them to a reader only so that they can't make changes after their manager approves it. So we could go ahead and use this share item action to do that, strip away those permissions, perhaps grant permissions to the sales manager for the time that they're doing approval. Then once they've approved it, we could drop them back to a reader role as well.
Okay. Thank you. Now, there was a follow-up question on the approval, Steve. And the question is that, is there a way to capture more information as part of approval process?
Okay, yeah, sure. So with these tasks that I've been showing, once you perform the task, you select the outcome that you're interested in. But if you needed to collect more information, so perhaps halfway through your process, you need to pause and you need to go and collect more information from the legal team or something like that, you can do that. So instead of using assign a task, what I could actually do here is use what we call a request data action. Okay. Now, when we drag this one on, I've actually got quite a lot of stuff going on in here. But what we can do is we can actually define a form that we want to present to the user halfway through that flow. So I could go here and I could add more questions. It really is, add some questions here. We've got all the different types of questions we want to ask them. And then as they fill out that form, the flow is then going to continue. And in a similar way to the start form, we're going to have access to all of those fields that they filled in as part of the flow.
Thank you, Steve. I guess the next question is, can you create other types of documents in Zenphi? I believe they're referring to the Google documents.
Like Google Sheets, Google Slides?
I believe so.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in a similar way that we did the document generation with docs, we can do the same thing with slides. We could go ahead and create new sheet files, new sheets, we add rows to it. We can pretty much automate the creation of all of the Google Workspace apps.
Okay. Great. Can I email this signed code to other people as well?
Yeah, of course. So down here where we saved the output, the signed file, we've just saved it to Google Drive here. But what I could do, if I wanted to, is I could just as easily drag on the send an email using Gmail and fill this out just like I would, asking for a connection. So this is the account that we're going to send from, the recipients, the subject, just like crafting an email. We've got a rich text body we can put in here. And down the bottom here, we've got attachments. So we could actually add in attachments here. So this is going to attach the signed PDF as an attachment to the email, and we could send that around if we wanted to.
Okay. There's one more question, Steve. Does Zenphi need to read all the Google Workspace data, for example, Google Gmail, Google Drive, in an account, or only the files that it's actively using? I guess it's around privacy and permissions. Sure.
So Zenphi will only ever access the information that has been requested of it to access as part of the flow. If we're when we did the form submission, it's just looking at that one particular form submission. When we're creating a particular document, it's just having access to that one document. When the flow has finished running and it no longer needs the information, there are settings where you can define how long Zenphi will keep that for debugging purposes. You could purge it after 30 days, or you could tell it to purge immediately. So we do have quite a lot of flexibility in terms of data privacy, data security, and how long we retain data as part of your process.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. I believe that was the last question. Maybe we just give it another 5-10 seconds, see if anyone has got any other questions. Otherwise, that was all the questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for taking the time to watch the webinar, and I hope you got a bit out of it. I hope you can see that Zenphi is a really powerful but pretty simple to use tool. I encourage you all, if you haven't already, go off to our website, sign up and start automating your processes. If you do have any questions after the webinar, please feel free to email me, steve@zenphi.com, and we will be making this recording available also.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Bye, everybody.